Blog Talk Radio.
BR on the World, our international program from Bostonred. Nonetheless, today the action was at the UN. President Obama was there. We'll cover him later in the week. Today we'll spotlight the presentation by the President of Brazil, President Dilma Rousseff, and also the President of the Iranian Republic, Mr. Rouhani. President Rouhani, we'll have him, Hassan Rouhani. There was supposed to be a meeting on the what they call the side with President Obama. That was canceled. We're not quite sure as to why that is canceled. But again, President Rouhani made very clear that Iran absolutely is no threat to the world and that peace is within the reach. And he went on to say there should be a meaningful dialogue. And speaking on wider global issues, he described the current systems of power in place across the globe as polarized between the so-called civilized and uncivilized. Rouhani described the prevalent discourse as assigning the North a central stage and relegating the South to the perpetual. Illusionary identity distractions, violent forms of xenophobia. And he also talked about the plight of the Palestinians, the arming of Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons, the assassination of nuclear scientists in Iran, Iranian nuclear scientists, regional and international actors militarizing Syria as an example of a zero-sum thinking. So you'll hear from him. He has an interpreter there, the same way with the President of Brazil. But she'll be talking about the NSA and spying on Brazil. And she brought it to the UN today where it should be, and that is the reason that we have it here, to make certain that people understand how these kinds of policies affect the global economy. Dilma Rousseff. Nonetheless, she brought it in there, and she referred to the National Security Agency's intercepts of her communication, hacking the state-owned Privadas oil company's network and spying on Brazilians on Facebook and also Google. And some of that work is brought out by Mr. Greenwald and also by Ed Snowden. So she called for the establishment of the international framework governing Internet use and communications to build on the landmark 2012 UN motion that extended human rights to the digital sphere. The UN must play a leading role in the effort to regulate and control, regulate the conduct of states with regard to these technologies. So she has definitely something to say. She has put a modern world and an event here. She's brought together cyberspace, the quote-unquote new frontier, and the politics surrounding it, to the UN where it should be because it's internationalized, and it is a situation that is ongoing. President Obama was there, but how he was received as opposed to her will be something we'll look at in other presentations. So basically what we had was the President of Iran, Mr. Rouhani, talking about civilized discussion and negotiation. President Obama said progress could be made, but we haven't seen it yet. So that summed up day one at the UN. There are 200 members there, and they will all be speaking. We'll be bringing many more as we have in the past. We brought the late president of Libya, Dr. Gaddafi. We brought him forward. We brought Fidel when he was there, and his brother Raul Castro, the Cubans, and from various other states that are major players on the world sphere. Brazil has the 5th largest economy in the world. very prominent economy there, and we have yet to hear from the Russian Republic. We'll, of course, air that. So on we go. The crisis, incidentally, in Nairobi, according to the government there, has ended. Thus, we go to President of Brazil and the President of Iran on our first day of coverage. Rahani and Rousseff, good day.
Also, communications by Brazilian diplomatic representation offices, including the permanent mission of Brazil with the United Nations and even the very presidency of the Republic of Brazil, were subject to interception of communications. Meddling in such a manner in the life and affairs of other countries is a breach of international law, and as such it is an affrontment to the principles that should otherwise govern relations among countries, especially among friendly nations. A country's sovereignty can never affirm itself to the detriment of another country's sovereignty. The right to security of a country's citizens can never be ensured by violating the fundamental human and civil rights of another country's citizens. Even worse, when private sector companies uphold this type of spying activity. The argument that illegal interception of information and data is allegedly intended to protect nations against terrorism is untenable. Mr. President, Brazil knows how to protect itself. Brazil, Mr. President, repudiates. Brazil tackles and does not provide shelter to terrorist groups. We are a democratic country, surrounded by democratic, peaceful countries that respect international law. We have been living in peace with our neighbors for more than 140 years. Like so many other Latin Americans, I myself fought on a first-hand basis against arbitrary behavior and censorship, and I could therefore not possibly fail to uncompromisingly defend individuals' right to privacy and my country's sovereignty. Without the right to privacy, there is no real freedom of speech or freedom of opinion, and therefore there is no actual democracy. Without respect to sovereignty, there is no base for proper relations among nations. What we have before us, Mr. President, is a serious case of violation of human rights and civil liberties. A case of invasion and capture of confidential secret information pertaining to business activities, and above all, a case of disrespect to national sovereignty, the national sovereignty of my country. We have let the U.S. government know about our protest by demanding explanations, apologies, and guarantees that such acts or procedures will never be repeated again. Friendly governments and societies that seek to consolidate a truly strategic partnership, such as is our case, cannot possibly allow recurring and illegal actions to go on as if they were normal, ordinary practice. Such actions are totally unacceptable. Mr. President, Brazil will further double its efforts to equip itself with the legislation, technologies, and the mechanisms that will protect us properly against illegal interception of communications and data. My administration will do everything within its reach and powers to defend the human rights of all Brazilians and to protect the human rights of all citizens in the world while protecting the fruits of the ingenious efforts of Brazilian workers and corporations. The problem, however, goes beyond the bilateral relations of two countries. It affects the international community itself, and as such requires an answer from it. Information and communications or telecommunications technologies cannot become a new battlefield among states. The time has come for us to foster the conditions required to prevent that the cyberspace becomes or be instrumentally manipulated as a weapon of war by means of spying activities, sabotage, and attacks against the systems and infrastructures owned by third-party countries. The United Nations organization should perform a leadership role in an effort to properly regulate the behavior of states regarding these technologies, and also consider the importance of the Internet and social networks as part of our efforts to build democracy worldwide. For that reason, Mr. President, Brazil will put forth proposals aimed at establishing a multilateral civil framework for Internet governance and use, as well as measures to ensure effective protection of the data and information trafficking through the Internet. We must establish multilateral mechanisms for the World Wide Web, mechanisms that are capable of ensuring materialization of principles such as, for example, number one, freedom of speech, individuals' privacy, and respect to human rights. Principle number two, democratic governance, multilateral, democratic, and open governance, exercised with a sense of transparency while encouraging collective creation and a broad-ranging participation of society, governments, and the private sector. The third is the principle of universality that ensures social and human development, as well as the construction of inclusive, non-discriminatory societies. The fourth is the principle of cultural diversity without any imposition of beliefs, customs, or values. Principle number five, that of network neutrality by observing only technical and ethical criteria, thus making unacceptable any restriction due to political, commercial, religious reasons, or any other reason. Full utilization of the Internet's potential therefore involves responsible regulation that will at the same time guarantee freedom of speech, security, and respect to human rights. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the choice of the post-2015 development agenda as the theme of this session of the General Assembly could not be more timely. The fight against poverty, hunger, and inequality constitutes the biggest challenge of our time. For that reason, in Brazil, we have put in place an economic model coupled with social inclusion, one that is ultimately anchored on the creation of jobs and strengthening of family farming, expansion of credit availability, appreciation in the value of workers' wages, and the construction of a broad-ranging social protection network, particularly by means of our family stipend program. In addition to the above-mentioned accomplishments and gains, we have uplifted from extreme poverty 22 million Brazilians through the Brazil Free of Extreme Poverty plan within no more than 2 years. We have drastically reduced child mortality in Brazil. A recent UNICEF report highlights Brazil as a country that has fostered one of the major drops in the child mortality indicator in the whole world. Children are a top priority for Brazil. This is translated in our commitment to education. We are the one country in the world that has most increased public investments in the educational sector, according to the latest OECD report. By means of law, we have now earmarked 75% of all oil revenues to education and 25% to the health sector. Mr. President, in the debate on the post-2015 development agenda, we should focus on the results attained at the Rio Plus 20 conference as key drivers. The major step we took in Rio de Janeiro consisted in placing poverty at the very center of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Poverty, Mr. President, is not a problem that is peculiar only to developing countries, and environmental protection is not a goal to be pursued only when poverty has been overcome. The meaning and the purpose of the post-2015 agenda are about building a world in which it is possible to grow, to include, to conserve, and to protect. Mr. President, by promoting social mobility and by overcoming extreme poverty, as we have been doing, we have established a huge contingent of citizens who now enjoy better standards of living and have greater access to information and a keener awareness of their rights. citizens who are now endowed with new hopes, new wishes, and new demands. The June demonstrations in Brazil are an inseparable part of our process of building democracy and social change. My administration did not crack down on those street demonstrations. Much on the contrary, we listened to and understood the voices coming from the streets. We listened to and understood their voices because we ourselves came from the streets. We were educated day to day and became who we are as part of the great struggles of Brazil. The streets are our ground, our base. The demonstrators did not ask for a return to the past. Rather, demonstrators did ask for further progress towards a future of more rights, more participation, and even more social gains. In Brazil, it was in this decade that we saw the greatest reduction in inequality in the past 50 years. It was in this decade that we established a social protection system that has allowed us to now virtually overcome extreme poverty. We know all too well that democracy breeds more desire for more democracy. Social inclusion breeds demands for even more social inclusion. Quality of life awakens people's yearning for even more quality of life. In our view, all of the progress made so far is always just a beginning. Our development strategy requires more, very much in line with the yearnings and wishes of all Brazilians. For that reason, it is not enough to hear or listen to them. It is necessary to do more, to change this extraordinary energy into achievements to the benefit of all. For that reason, I have recently launched 5 major pacts. The Pact Against Corruption and for Political Reform, the Pact for Urban Mobility, aimed at improving public transportation and at fostering an urban reform, a Pact for Education, our great passport to the future, with support from the Oil Resources Revenues and the Oil Social Fund, the Pact for Health, which provides for doctors to assist and save the lives of Brazilians who live in the most remote and poorest corners of the country, the Pact for Social, rather fiscal responsibility in order to ensure feasibility of this new stage in our history. Ladies and gentlemen, although the most acute phase of the crisis is now behind us, the fact remains that the world's economic situation remains fragile, with unacceptable unemployment levels. ILO statistics point out that there are more than 200 million unemployed people worldwide. The phenomenon affects the population of both developed and developing countries. This is the right time for us to strengthen the trends for growth in the world's economy, trends that are pointing towards signs of recovery. Emerging countries alone cannot ensure resumption of global growth. More than ever before, it is necessary to engage in concerted action in order to reduce unemployment and reestablish momentum in international trade. We are all on the same boat. My country is restoring growth despite the impact of the international crisis in the past few years. We have relied on 3 key elements. Number 1, commitment towards sound macroeconomic policies. Number 2, continuing and upholding successful social inclusion policies. And number 3, adoption of measures aimed at increasing our productivity and therefore our international competitiveness. We are committed to stability, to inflation control, to improving the quality of public spending, and to upholding proper fiscal performance. We reiterate, Mr. President, our support to a reform of the IMF. Governance of the fund should reflect the weight of emerging and developing countries in the world's economy. Delaying this adaptive reform will further reduce the fund's legitimacy and effectiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, the year 2015 will mark the 70th anniversary of the United Nations and the 10th anniversary of the World Summit of 2005. As such, it will be an occasion for us to carry out the urgent reform that we have been calling for since that first summit. We must avoid a collective defeat of coming to 2015 without a Security Council capable of fully exercising its responsibilities in today's world. The limited representation of the United Nations Security Council in view of the new challenges of the 21st century is a source of grave concern. Examples of that concern include the huge difficulty in offering a solution to the ongoing Syrian conflict and the state of paralysis in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian question. On important issues, the recurring polarization among permanent members has led to a dangerous inaction. The Council must be urgently endowed with voices that are both independent and constructive. Only by expanding the number of permanent and non-permanent members of the Security Council and by including developing countries in both categories will it be possible to solve and overcome the current representativeness and legitimacy deficit that the Council suffers from. Mr. President, the general debate provides us with an opportunity to reiterate the fundamental principles that guide my country's foreign policy and inform our stance on hot and pressing issues of today's international agenda. We guide ourselves and actions on a defense of a multilateral world, a world governed by international law, where peaceful solution of conflicts prevail, and also where the pursuit of a fair and solidarity-based order prevail, both economically and socially. The crisis in Syria has caused commotion and breathed a sense of anger. 2.5 years of lost lives and destruction have caused the biggest humanitarian disaster of this century. Brazil, whose population of Syrian descent is an important component of our national identity, is deeply involved with this plight. It is necessary to prevent the killing of innocent people, women, children, and the elderly. It is necessary to silence weapons, whether conventional or chemical, whether used by the government or by the rebels. There is no military way out. The only solution is through negotiation, dialogue, and understanding. Syria's decision to accede to the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and enforce it immediately was an important development. The measure, as such, is decisive to overcome the conflict and helps build a world free of chemical weapons. The use of such weapons, I stress, is heinous and unacceptable under any circumstances. We therefore support the agreement reached between the United States and Russia to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons. It is incumbent upon the Syrian government to fulfill it in its entirety and do so in good faith and in a spirit of cooperation. Under any circumstances and in any case, we repudiate unilateral interventions in contempt of international law and without authorization by the Security Council. That would only further worsen the lack of political stability in the region and would further increase human suffering. Likewise, a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine has taken on a new and pressing dimension given the sweeping changes that the Middle East is currently going through. The time has come for one to meet the legitimate Palestinian aspirations to an independent and sovereign state. The time has also come for us to materialize the ample international consensus for a two-state solution. Current talks between Israelis and Palestinians should yield practical and significant results towards an agreement. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the history of the 20th century shows that giving up the multilateral system is a prelude to wars, with the ensuing trail of human destitution and devastation. The history of the 20th century also shows that promoting the multilateral system yields fruits on the ethical, political, and institutional fronts. May I thus renew an appeal for an ample and vigorous convergence of political will that will uphold and reinvigorate the multilateral system, of which the United Nations is the main pillar. When the United Nations organization was founded, the peoples of the world rallied around the hope that humankind would be able to overcome the wounds of World War II, the hope that, yes, it would be possible to rebuild from debris of destruction and massacre a new world of liberty, solidarity, and prosperity. We all have the responsibility not to let die such a generous hope, such a generous and fruitful hope. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Of violence and extremism, fear of poverty and destructive discrimination, fear of decay and destruction of life-sustaining resources, fear of disregard for human dignity and rights, and fear of neglect of morality. Alongside these fears, however, there are new hopes. The hope of universal acceptance by the people and the elite all across the globe of yes to peace and no to war, and the hope of preference of dialogue over conflict and moderation over extremism. The recent election in Iran represent a clear, living example of the wise choice of hope, rationality, and moderation by the great people of Iran. The realization of democracy consistent with religion and the peaceful transfer of executive power manifested that Iran is the anchor of stability in an otherwise ocean of regional instabilities. The firm belief of our people and government in enduring peace ocean of regional instabilities. The firm belief of our people and government in enduring peace, stability, tranquility, peaceful resolution of disputes, and reliance on the ballot box as the basis of power, public acceptance and legitimacy has indeed played a key role in creating such a safe environment. Relegating the South to the periphery has led to the establishment of a monologue at the level of international relations, the creation of illusory identity distinctions, and the current prevalent violent forms of xenophobia are the inevitable outcome of such a discourse. Propagandistic and unfounded faith-phobic, Islamophobic, Shiaphobic, and Iran-phobic and unfounded faith-phobic, Islamophobic, Shiaphobic, and Iran-phobic discourses to do indeed represent serious threats against world peace and human security. This propagandistic discourse has assumed dangerous proportions through portrayal and inculcation of presumed imaginary threats. One such imaginary threat is the so-called Iranian threat, which has been employed as an excuse to justify a long catalog of crimes and catastrophic practices over the past 3 decades. The arming of the Saddam Hussein regime with chemical weapons and supporting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are just 2 examples of such catastrophes. Let me say this in all sincerity before this August World Assembly, that based on irrefutable evidence, those who harp on the so-called threat of Iran are either a threat against international peace and security themselves or promote such a threat. Iran poses absolutely no threat to the world or the region. In fact, in ideals as well as in actual practice, my country has been a harbinger of just peace and comprehensive security. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, nowhere in the world has violence been so deadly and destructive as in North Africa and West Asia. Military intervention in Afghanistan, Saddam Hussein's imposed war against Iran, occupation of Kuwait, military interventions against Iraq, brutal repression of the Palestinian people, assassination of common people and political figures in Iran, and terrorist bombings in countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan, and Lebanon are examples of violence in this region in the last 3 decades. What has been and continues to be practiced against the innocent people of Palestine is nothing less than structural violence. Palestine is under occupation. The basic rights of the Palestinians are tragically violated, and they are deprived of the right of return and access to their homes, birthplace, and homeland. Apartheid as a concept can hardly describe the crimes and the institutionalized aggression against the innocent Palestinian people. The human tragedy in Syria represents a painful example of catastrophic spread of violence and extremism in our region. From the very outset of the crisis, and when some regional and international actors helped to militarize the situation through infusion of arms and intelligence into the country and active support of extremist groups, we emphasized that there was no military solution to the Syrian crisis. Pursuit of expansionist strategies and objectives and attempts to change the regional balance through proxies cannot be camouflaged behind humanitarian rhetoric. The common objective of the international community should be a quick end to the killing of the innocent, while condemning any use of chemical weapons. We welcome serious acceptance of the Chemical Weapons Convention and believe that the access by extremist terrorist groups to such weapons is the greatest danger to the region that must be considered in any disarmament plan. Simultaneously, I should underline the illegitimate and ineffective threat to use, or the actual use of force will only lead to further exacerbation of violence and crisis in the region. Terrorism and the killing of innocent people represent the ultimate inhumanity of extremism and violence. Terrorism is a violent sport and knows no country or national borders. But the violence and extreme actions such as the use of drones against innocent people in the name of combating terrorism, extreme actions such as the use of drones against innocent people in the name of combating terrorism should also be condemned. Here, I should also say a word about the criminal assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists. For what crimes have they been assassinated? The United Nations and the Security Council should answer the question: have the perpetrators been condemned? Unjust sanctions as manifestation of structural violence are intrinsically inhumane and against peace, and contrary to the claims of those who pursue and impose them, it is not the state and the political elite that are targeted, but rather it is the common people who are victimized by these sanctions. Let us not forget millions of Iraqis who, as a result of sanctions, covered in international legal jargon, suffered and lost their lives, and many more who continue to suffer all through their lives. These sanctions are violent, pure and simple, whether called smart or otherwise, unilateral or multilateral. These sanctions violate inalienable human rights, inter alia, the right to the peace, right to development, right to access to health and education, and above all, the right to life. Sanctions beyond any and all rhetoric cause belligerence, warmongering, and human suffering. It should be borne in mind, however, that the negative impact is not merely limited to the intended victims of sanctions. It also affects the economy and livelihood of other countries and societies, including the countries imposing sanctions. Mr. President, Excellencies, violence and extremism nowadays have gone beyond the physical real and have unfortunately afflicted and tarnished the mental and spiritual dimensions of life in human societies. Violence and extremism leave no space for understanding and moderation as the necessary foundations of collective life of human beings and the modern society. Intolerance is the predicament of our time. We need to promote and reinforce tolerance in light of the religious teachings and appropriate cultural and political approaches. The human society should be elevated from the state of mere tolerance to that of collective collaboration. We should not just tolerate others. We should rise above mere tolerance and dare to work together. People all over the world are tired of war, violence, and extremism. They hope for a change in the status quo. And this is a unique opportunity for us all. The Islamic Republic of Iran believes that all challenges can be managed successfully through a smart, judicious blend of hope and moderation. Warmongers are bent on extinguishing all hope, but hope for change, for the better is an innate, religious, widespread, and universal concept. Hope is founded on the belief in the universal will of the people across the globe to combat violence and extremism, to cherish change, to oppose imposed structures, to value choice, and to act in accordance with human responsibility. Hope is, no doubt, one of the greatest gifts bestowed upon human beings by their all-loving Creator. And the moderation is to think and move in a wise, judicious manner, conscious of the time and the space, and to align exalted ideals with choice of effective strategies and policies, while cognizant of objective realities. The Iranian people, in a judiciously sober choice in the recent elections, voted for the discourse of hope, foresight, and prudent moderation, both at home and abroad. In foreign policy, the combination of these elements means that the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a regional power, will act responsibly. The combination of these elements means that the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a regional power, will act responsibly with regard to regional and international security, and is willing and prepared to cooperate in these fields bilaterally as well as multilaterally with other responsible actors. We defend peace based on democracy and the ballot box everywhere, including in Syria, Bahrain, and other countries in the region, and believe that there are no violent solutions to world crisis. The bitter and ugly realities of the human society can only be overcome through recourse to and reliance on human wisdom, interaction and moderation, securing peace and democracy, and ensuring the legitimate rights of all countries in the world, including the Middle East, cannot and will not be realized through militarism. Iran seeks to resolve problems, not to create them. There is no issue or dossier that cannot be resolved through reliance on hope and prudent moderation, mutual respect, and rejection of violence and extremism. Iran's nuclear dossier is a case in point. As clearly stated by the leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, acceptance of the inalienable right of Iran constitutes the best and the easiest way of resolving this issue. This is not political rhetoric. Rather, it is based on a profound recognition of the state of technology in Iran, global political environment, and the end of the era of zero-sum games, and the imperative of seeking common objectives and interests toward reaching common understanding and shared security. Put otherwise, Iran and other actors should pursue two common objectives as two mutually inseparable parts of a political solution for the nuclear dossier of Iran. One, Iran's nuclear program, and for the matter, that of all other countries, must pursue exclusively peaceful purposes. I declare here openly and unambiguously that, notwithstanding the positions of others, this has been and will always be the objective of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nuclear weapon and other weapons of mass destruction have no place in Iran's security and defense doctrine and contradict our fundamental religious and ethical convictions. Our national interests make it imperative that we remove any and all reasonable concerns about Iran's peaceful nuclear program. Two, the second objective, that is, acceptance of and respect for the implementation of the right to the enrichment inside Iran and enjoyment of other related nuclear rights, provides the only path toward achieving the first objective. Nuclear knowledge in Iran has been domesticated now, and the nuclear technology, inclusive of enrichment, has already reached industrial scale. It is therefore an illusion and extremely unrealistic to presume that the peaceful nature of the nuclear program of Iran could be ensured through impeding the program via illegitimate pressures. In this context, the Islamic Republic of Iran, insisting on the implementation of its rights and the imperative of international respect and cooperation in this exercise, is prepared to engage immediately in time-bound and result-oriented talks to build mutual confidence and removal of mutual uncertainties with full transparency. Iran seeks constructive engagement with other countries based on mutual respect and common interests, and within the same framework does not seek to increase tensions with the United States. I listened carefully